The Third Reich, a regime that audaciously promised 1,000 years of dominance, ultimately crumbled after a mere 12. Yet, in that brief, horrifying span, it plunged the world into the deadliest conflict ever witnessed and perpetrated atrocities so monumental that a new term, genocide, had to be coined to describe them. Its genesis lay in profound humiliation. Following World War I, Germany found itself dismembered, shackled by crippling debt, and forced to bear sole culpability for a war that had claimed millions of lives. The Treaty of Versailles didn't merely penalize a nation, it fractured its very spirit. And a broken nation, desperate for solace, will invariably rally behind anyone who vows to restore its former glory. By 1929, the Great Depression delivered the final blow. 6 million Germans were jobless, and banks vanished overnight, leaving widespread despair in their wake. Into this maelstrom of hopelessness stepped Adolf Hitler, a failed artist and decorated soldier who possessed a perilous insight that people in pain do not seek truth, they crave someone to blame. He ascended to the chancellorship in January 1933. Within weeks, the Reichstag parliament mysteriously burned. Hitler swiftly exploited this incident to suspend civil liberties, establish rule by decree, and consign his political adversaries to Dachau, the first concentration camp, which opened its gates just 2 months into his reign. By summer, every other political party had been systematically eliminated. Most Germans offered little resistance, for Hitler offered them something no one else had in years: employment, infrastructure, and a resurgence of national pride. But this perceived miracle was a meticulously constructed lie, funded by clandestine debt and engineered for one singular purpose: war. In 1938, he annexed Austria without firing a single shot, then swiftly claimed Czechoslovakia. On September 1, 1939, his tanks thundered into Poland, igniting World War II. Denmark capitulated in a mere 6 hours. France surrendered in 6 weeks. By 1941, the swastika, a symbol of terror, unfurled triumphantly over the majority of Europe. But Hitler's ambitions extended far beyond territorial conquest. He craved annihilation. 6 million Jews were systematically murdered, alongside millions of Roma, disabled individuals, and political prisoners. Gas chambers operated with chilling efficiency, resembling assembly lines of death. Death camps were engineered like factories of extermination. Trains, which could have transported vital soldiers and supplies to the front, were instead repurposed to deliver entire families to their executions. Then, Stalingrad shattered everything. In the brutal winter of 1942, 300,000 German soldiers found themselves encircled, but Hitler defiantly forbade retreat. Only 6,000 ever returned home. By 1944, the Allies had stormed the beaches of Normandy, while Soviet forces pressed in from the east. Cities across Germany were reduced to rubble. Yet, Hitler, clinging to a deluded vision, sent teenagers to fight and ordered Germany's own bridges and factories destroyed rather than allow them to fall intact into enemy hands. On April 30, 1945, with Soviet troops just 2 blocks away, he took his own life in his underground bunker. 2 days later, Berlin fell. Within a week, the war in Europe concluded. 12 years, 4 months, and 8 days. 70 million dead. A continent reduced to ashes. Germans would refer to it as the stun null, the 0 hour, as if civilization itself had to begin anew. No empire in history had risen so swiftly, burned so fiercely, or collapsed so utterly, and none left behind a darker, more enduring truth. When a nation sacrifices its conscience for the intoxicating lure of power, its downfall is not merely a risk, it is an inevitable guarantee. The Inca Empire, a civilization that defied conventional understanding of imperial development, built one of the world's greatest empires despite lacking wheels, iron tools, or a written language. High in the majestic Andes, where the atmosphere thins and towering peaks pierce the clouds, this remarkable civilization flourished, challenging every prerequisite historians once believed essential for an empire's existence. By the early 1500s, the Inca held sway over an estimated 12 million people, their dominion stretching across 2,500 miles of formidable mountains, arid deserts, and dense jungles. This vast territory was interconnected by an astonishing 25,000 miles of roads, meticulously carved into the earth, often by hand. Their story began around 1200 AD, when a modest tribe settled in the fertile valley of Cusco. For 2 centuries, they remained an obscure entity, just one among many groups vying for land and water in the highlands. Then, a pivotal figure emerged, Pachacuti. In 1438, he seized the throne, decisively vanquished the rival Chanca people, and initiated an expansion so rapid it had no precedent in the Americas. Within a mere 3 generations, from father to son to grandson, the Inca established control over most of western South America. Their strategy extended beyond mere conquest. They skillfully absorbed diverse cultures. Local rulers were brought to Cusco, the imperial capital, where they received education, were often integrated through marriage into Inca noble families, and then dispatched back home to govern in the empire's name. They meticulously recorded everything, not with script, but through an intricate system of knotted strings called quipu, whose full complexity still fascinates scholars. They sustained millions through ingeniously terraced farms carved into steep mountainsides. Their society operated without money or traditional markets, relying instead on a sophisticated system of labor and reciprocal exchange so intricately organized that it continues to baffle economists today. Their stonework, achieved without mortar, was so extraordinarily precise that 5 centuries later, one still cannot slide a knife blade between the perfectly fitted blocks. Then, in 1525, the empire's foundations began to crack. The revered Emperor Huayna Capac died, most likely from smallpox, a devastating disease that had raced ahead of the Spanish conquistadors even before their arrival. His death ignited a brutal civil war between his sons, Huáscar and Atahualpa. By the time Atahualpa emerged victorious, the empire was bleeding, its unity shattered. It was at this vulnerable moment that Francisco Pizarro arrived, leading a shockingly small force of 168 men, 1 cannon, and 27 horses, poised against an empire of 12 million. At Cajamarca in 1532, Pizarro extended an invitation to Atahualpa for a diplomatic meeting. When the emperor arrived with a modest, unarmed retinue, the Spanish unleashed a surprise attack. Thousands of Inca warriors and attendants perished in minutes, and Atahualpa was captured. In a desperate plea for freedom, he offered to fill an entire room with gold and twice over with silver. The Inca dutifully delivered this immense treasure. Pizarro, however, cruelly took the bounty and executed him anyway. By 1572, the last Inca stronghold had fallen. The final independent ruler, Tupac Amaru, was dragged to Cusco's main square and publicly beheaded. An empire that had flourished for centuries, without the very tools the rest of the world deemed essential for progress, was utterly destroyed in just 40 years, by disease, by betrayal, and by 168 men who desired gold more than they valued truth. The Ottoman Empire. In 1453, a prodigious 21-year-old sultan achieved what no commander had accomplished in a millennium. He conquered Constantinople, and he did so by an extraordinary feat, dragging his formidable ships over a mountain. For centuries, the city had withstood siege after relentless siege, its defenses bolstered by colossal walls and the protective waters of the Golden Horn. But Mehmed II, the audacious young Ottoman sultan, refused to acknowledge what everyone else considered an insurmountable obstacle. When his fleet found its path blocked by the massive chain guarding the harbor, he commanded that 70 of his ships be hauled overland on greased logs, across a formidable hill, and into the harbor, circumventing the city's formidable maritime defenses. On May 29th, Constantinople finally fell. The Byzantine Empire, the last living vestige of ancient Rome, vanished from history, and the Ottomans dramatically announced their arrival on the world stage. They had begun as little more than a whisper. Around 1299, a tribal leader named Osman established a tiny principality in northwestern Anatolia. For a century, his descendants incrementally expanded their dominion across the Balkans and Asia Minor, absorbing rivals through strategic warfare, political marriages, and shrewd alliances. But the fall of Constantinople was a seismic event that transformed everything. It provided the Ottomans with a capital befitting a true empire, and granted them strategic control over the vital crossroads between Europe and Asia. What followed was a dynasty that endured for over 600 years. Under the magnificent reign of Suleiman the Magnificent in the 1500s, the empire reached its zenith, its vast territories stretching from Hungary to North Africa, from the gates of Vienna to the Persian Gulf. Its formidable armies instilled fear across Europe, and its navy commanded the Mediterranean. Its meticulously codified laws were so comprehensive that Suleiman was revered by his own people not simply as the Magnificent, but as the lawgiver. Yet, 6 centuries of accumulated power inevitably carry a weight that, over time, can fracture even the most robust edifice. By the 1800s, the once mighty empire earned the somber moniker, the sick man of Europe. Its territories began to peel away. Greece, Serbia, Egypt, one by one, either declared independence or succumbed to mounting European influence. The imperial treasury was bled dry by an increasing reliance on foreign loans. Reforms, when they finally came, were often too little, too late, and met with fierce resistance. The Janissaries, once the empire's elite fighting force, had devolved into a reactionary power bloc that ruthlessly crushed any genuine attempt at change. Then came World War I. The Ottomans, in a fateful gamble, aligned themselves with Germany and ultimately lost. The empire was systematically dismembered by the victorious Allied powers, and in 1922, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk abolished the Sultanate. The last Sultan, Mehmed VI, quietly slipped out of Istanbul aboard a British warship. 6 centuries of continuous rule concluded not with a thunderous battle, but with a solitary man boarding a boat in the dark of night. The Ottoman Empire had outlasted nearly every rival it had ever confronted. It had survived civil wars, devastating plagues, and countless sieges. But in the end, it could not survive the one adversary no empire can ever truly defeat, a world that had irrevocably moved on without it. The Byzantine Empire. They proudly proclaimed themselves Romans. A full 1,000 years after the Western Roman Empire had officially fallen, they still clung fiercely to that identity. And in a profound sense, they were right. When the Western Roman Empire disintegrated under a relentless barrage of barbarian invasions in 476 AD, its eastern counterpart not only survived, but flourished spectacularly. Constantinople, the magnificent city Emperor Constantine had painstakingly built upon the ancient foundations of a modest Greek fishing town called Byzantium, became the wealthiest, most heavily fortified metropolis on earth. While Western Europe descended into what would later be known as the Dark Ages, the Byzantines diligently preserved Roman law, nurtured the intellectual heritage of Greek learning, and upheld the Christian faith, all behind walls so impregnable that no army breached them for 8 centuries. Under the visionary reign of Justinian in the 500s, the empire spectacularly reclaimed nearly half of the old Roman world, including North Africa, Italy, and the Western Mediterranean. He also commissioned the construction of the Hagia Sophia, a cathedral so vast and awe-inspiring that visitors were moved to tears at the sight of its colossal dome. Justinian further codified Roman law into a comprehensive legal system so thorough and enduring that it continues to influence the courts of Europe and Latin America even today. At its zenith, an estimated 20 million people lived under Byzantine rule, and Constantinople's population dwarfed every other city in Christendom. But empires that successfully weather every storm eventually succumb to the dangerous belief that they are invincible. The devastating plagues of the 500s killed millions and severely depleted the imperial treasury. Arab armies, in the 600s, swept away some of the empire's richest provinces, Egypt, Syria, and Palestine, effectively seizing 3/4 of the empire's revenue within a single generation. What remained was a smaller, poorer, and perpetually embattled state. The Byzantines, however, proved remarkably adaptive. They fundamentally reorganized their military, developed Greek fire, a terrifying incendiary weapon that burned even on water, and repelled siege after siege at Constantinople's formidable walls. They successfully converted the Slavic peoples to Christianity, profoundly influenced the nascent Russian states, and meticulously preserved the invaluable knowledge of ancient Greece while the rest of Europe largely forgot it ever existed. Yet, even this resilience proved insufficient. The Fourth Crusade, ironically launched by fellow Christians, ruthlessly sacked Constantinople in 1204. Crusaders, ostensibly pledged to fight Muslims, instead pillaged the magnificent city, hauling away 9 centuries of accumulated treasure. The empire never truly recovered from this devastating betrayal. What was eventually re-established in 1261 was a mere shadow of its former glory, a small, financially depleted state surrounded by enemies, surviving precariously on shrewd diplomacy and sheer luck. The Ottoman Turks inexorably closed in, slowly claiming province after province throughout the 1300s and 1400s. By the time Sultan Mehmed II laid siege to Constantinople in 1453, the once vibrant city that had housed 500,000 people was reduced to a mere 50,000 inhabitants. Its defenders numbered fewer than 8,000. On May 29th, after a heroic struggle, the ancient walls finally gave way. The last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, perished fighting valiantly at the gates, his body never to be recovered. The empire that had proudly carried Rome's illustrious name for over 1,000 years met its end on the very ground where it had begun, at the walls of a city that had outlasted everything except time itself.